from the shadows of the National Palace.
Subscribe all the way to the muddy trenches of politics. This is the pigsty, the pig pen of politics with Che Morano.
How are you, my dear inhabitants of this pigsty called Mexico? Put on your gas masks and get out the disinfectant, because today the stench coming from the halls of power is stronger than ever. Welcome to the pigsty, the pig pen of politics. The only corner of the internet where we don't fall for cheap tricks and where we call the pigs by their names. Today is March 3, 2026, and you're greeted by your untrustworthy host, Luis Berman. The world is falling apart. There's a smell of sulfur everywhere. And meanwhile, here in the national pigsty, our politicians keep playing house with the country's future. Make yourselves comfortable in your mud, because today the international stench and the national tragedy smell exactly the same, like gunpowder, hypocrisy, and blood spilled by the usual ones. And today the world feels like a low-budget movie directed by a psychopath. And we, as always, are in the front row, without popcorn and with water up to our necks. We're in the most expensive action movie in history. Let's start with this information bloodbath. As Jack the Ripper said, let's go step by step. Meanwhile, the United States and Israel are locked in a war that seems straight out of Hollywood's darkest script. Here in Mexico, we can afford to take a pause. Do you remember the electoral reform? Yes, the same one they sold us as the end of privileges and the purification of the system. Well, it turns out that our brand new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, has decided to pull the handbrake on it for the third time. The big shots say there are technical details in the draft that are unnecessary. Come on, translated from cheap bureaucratic language to plain street Spanish. Can they ever agree? Not even with their own shadow? The clock is counting down. They have until May 31st for this mockery to be legal for the 2027 midterms. What's bothering them? Let's look at the sticking points, because this is where things get complicated. Goodbye. Immediate re-election for 2030. Imagine the terror of those legislative parasites who already saw themselves living off public funds until their eyelashes turned gray. Ban on nepotism. Good Lord. How dare they suggest that Junior or the comadre shouldn't inherit the seat? That's sacrilege in Mexico. It's going against the sacred tradition of family meritocracy. A 25% cut to funding. This is where the PT raised hell. They say it's about centralizing power. No, I don't think so, gentlemen. The thing is, they've already pictured themselves eating beans instead of caviar, and that's just not their style. No matter how socialist or communist their allies claim to be, those who swore eternal loyalty, today they're baring their teeth at Sheinbaum, because messing with their wallets is worse than insulting their mothers. And the Green Party is singing the same tune, so let's see how this mess ends. On the other hand, let's move on to more sensitive topics, like being the most wanted ghost, as we all know. Finally, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, also known as El Mencho, was caught. But what really turns my stomach isn't the death of the boss, but the courtesy of the Attorney General's office. How refined. Handing over the remains to the family as if it were a package delivery with a gift bow. The only thing missing was a condolence card and a wreath paid for by the Ministry of Finance. It turns out that the security cabinet is on high alert because of possible succession disputes. Translation: get ready, because when the boss is gone, the dogs fight over the bone, and we're the ones who pay the price. They say Jalisco and Michoacan are stable. Yeah, right. As stable as a volcano before it erupts. They want to sell us the idea that once the dog is dead, the rabies is gone. But in this pigsty, there's always a madder pup, ready to die. And here comes the contrast of tyrannies. Look, what a gem of irony fate gives us. In Iran, the regime of the Ayatollahs is collapsing. People got tired of the old bearded men and their 12th century laws. In Mexico, the world's most wanted drug lord was taken down. You'd think we're making progress, but the question is, what's next? Here, when one head falls, 3 more grow back. Meanwhile, in Congress, they're fighting over who gets more money from the parties. In the streets, the power vacuum is filled with gunpowder. It turns out that the Angelitos, led by Ayatollah Khamenei, the top leadership of the Islamic Republic, have been wiped off the map. Who was the exterminating archangel? Well, none other than Donald Trump, using that little toy called American brute force and the surgical efficiency of the Israeli Mossad. Look, Mr. Trump decided that enough with the cardboard diplomacy and sent Khamenei and his entourage of fanatics to meet their 72 virgins all at once. But this is where the sharp analysis comes in, because hope is a luxury we don't allow ourselves in the pigsty. Some naive people compare what's happening in Iran with Venezuela, where a former Bolivarian leader is supposedly dismantling Chavismo-Madurismo piece by piece, like someone taking apart a rusty Lego set. But Iran is not the real Venezuela. Iran smells like Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan. Do you remember Saddam? They hanged him and the country became a hornet's nest. Do you remember Gaddafi? They lynched him in a ditch, and today Libya is an open-air slave market. And Afghanistan, 20 years of imported democracy, only to end up handing the keys of the kingdom back to the same old bearded men. And while state-of-the-art missiles rain down in the Middle East, here in our beautiful and sadly wounded Mexico, in our national pigsty, we also have our own share of lead. The big question, and now what? What's next? All right, El Mencho has fallen. Applause, medals, triumphant press releases at the morning conference. But let's be honest, what's next? What is the next move on this chessboard, where the pieces are human lives? Notice the contrast. Trump in Iran promises a 1-month war. We go in, break everything, and leave. The Mexican government tells us that the mobilization will last a long time, years, decades, probably an entire generation. Here, there isn't an aircraft carrier that withdraws after victory. Here, the enemy lives next door, recruits young people who have no future, and infiltrates the police to the core. How many more beheadings? Let's see. How many Hydra heads have to roll before we Mexicans can celebrate a great final victory, so it doesn't feel like a collective funeral? Look, you tell us that we are neighbors, friends, partners, and allies. What beautiful words. They sound like a country wedding toast. But the reality, the one that doesn't appear in the foreign ministry's statements, is that we are the backyard of a superpower. That is already tired of the neighbor blasting music at full volume. And what about some armed guys charging protection money on the sidewalk? Today in Mexico, there isn't a state, municipality, or zip code where these organizations don't operate. They no longer just sell magic powders. Now they're the ones who decide who sells chicken, who puts up the streetlights, and even who wins the elections. They have taken on state functions, while our politicians keep arguing about whether humanism is spelled with a capital H or a lowercase h. On the other side of the river, we have the most temperamental blonde on the planet, Donald Trump, who from day one of his second round in the White House, on January 20, 2025, for those who forget, he put a target on our backs. January 20, 2025. On his first day, before even trying on the presidential slippers, he signed an executive order declaring the Mexican cartels as international terrorist organizations. Boom. With a single stroke, he turned us from trade partners into a nest of terrorists. Who? December 15, 2025. As if that wasn't enough, he signed another order, declaring fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. Translation for those who don't speak gringo. If the cartels are terrorists and fentanyl is a powdered atomic bomb, then Mexico is no longer a sovereign country. It's a battlefield that needs liberation. This is where things get hairy. Trump has a very different, very clear narrative, and it's not exactly a fairy tale. He claims that Mexico is governed by organized crime, and he's not exactly lying. And of course, like a true savior of the world, he has insisted to Sheinbaum again and again, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, that she should let the United States Army come to support ours. Claudia Sheinbaum, true to the tradition of, here there is sovereignty, has rejected and prevented this intervention. Of course, sovereignty is the last thing we have left, even though that sovereignty sometimes seems like it's only good for letting the cartels keep expanding without anyone from outside bothering their business. That's where we are, my dear pigs. between a president who can't decide to assert her own wishes and a political class that's afraid of losing their inheritance of public offices. We have a country that honors a criminal's death and welcomes back his remains, with Congress preferring it that way. They'd rather watch the world burn than do their job properly. Don't be fooled, this isn't strategy, it's fear. Fear of losing their privileges and fear of what comes after the fall of great empires, both those of faith in Iran and those of drugs in Jalisco. The reality is that whether it's turbans in Tehran or tactical vests in Jalisco, power always feeds on the same flesh, the flesh of the citizens. On the ground, Trump plays with satellite technologies. Meanwhile, here we keep sending young men from the National Guard to die on the trails of Michoacan for a victory that never seems to come. Final victory. Don't make me laugh. The final victory will be the day a politician tells the truth. And when the budget for education is bigger than the one for flower wreaths for the kingpins, Trump hasn't removed Mexico from his list of targets. He just has it on pause while he finishes arranging his pieces in the rest of the world. Trump. But make no mistake, the narrative is already built for the world. We're no longer the country of tequila and mariachi, but the country of fentanyl. And what about the warlords? Mexico is at the center of a perfect storm. And as always, those of us without a bunker are the ones who are going to get wet. So my dear dwellers of filth, keep your eyes open and your wallets closed. Because between those who want to help us from the north and those who rule us from the shadows here inside, we no longer know who is going to give us the coup de grace. The problem, my dear little pigs of this pigsty, is that even though the welfare maid holds back the troops at the entrance, she hasn't been able to get Mexico off Trump's military agenda. Keep wallowing in the mud of misinformation if you want, but here in the pigsty, the pig pen of politics, we'll keep scratching at the scab of reality. Go walk in the shade because the sun burns and politics, well, politics stinks. I'm Louis Berman, and I say goodbye. Remember that in this 2026, even the air we breathe has an owner. And it's not the people. Goodbye, goodbye. This is the pigsty, the pig pen of politics with Louis Berman.